Hey everyone, welcome today to part 5 of Pripyat. We're getting certainly close to the end of this mini-series. Though mini-series is a bit of a stretch from what I intended initially. Certainly I didn't think it would go this long, but it has lasted quite a while now. But plan is, this is the second to last episode. So next week, hopefully wrapping up the series, and then after that I'll follow with a cinematic video or two before we get back into Berlin Noir, because I certainly have been missing building in that city, and certainly I know many of you have as well. And yeah, so I'm definitely excited to get back into that. But when I asked last week if you guys were interested in, wrapping up this series in one episode or two, which honestly, one episode probably wouldn't even been possible anyways if you guys had wanted that. But either way, there was a resounding support for 2 episodes. In fact, not a single person said to wrap up this series in only 1 episode, which I kind of expected that. As far as viewership goes for this series, it is a little lower than my Berlin Noir, since that is where I have where I gained the majority of my subs, and certainly where most people enjoy watching my videos. So it makes sense that as my viewership, number of views goes down, the people who do watch this at least want to, see it finish and, not be rushed or anything like that. So, yeah, it makes sense. So 2 episodes it'll be, this one being 1, and next week being the final time-lapse build episode. But anyways, so for today's build, we're going to be doing a couple different things. Starting out here, we are working on it was like a boat port type thing, recreational area. Just like it was partly a dock on this portion of the lake here that came off the main river. And here, this little thing here that I'm building, that's kind of circular in shape. This is where there was the Cafe Pripyat, and I guess they locally, or the people who live there, they called it the Dish, based on the shape here of how it kind of sticks out there in a half moon shape type thing. But it definitely looked like one of the nicer places in the city, at least to enjoy the outdoors. There was a lot of green space in Pripyat for sure, but not like a lot of outside. There wasn't too much to do within the area of Pripyat, surrounded by buildings and such, unless you of course were going inside to many of the public buildings, so gyms, swimming pools, the small stadiums, whatever it may be. But if you wanted to get outside, you maybe experience the outdoors a tad bit more, then this seemed to be the place that was the favorite, since you did have the cafe there. So grabbing food or drink, whatever it may be, but also you can go swimming along here. And in the summertime, there would be sailboats sailing around, as well as, I believe, a little ferry that would just more or less circle the area, I guess, because there wasn't really any opposite destination, away from this location. But yeah, it still looked like a pretty cool place. It had this staircase there, which I built a second ago, leading down from the top to the lake, which actually looked pretty cool. And yeah, I have a picture in a little bit of not the side from the lake, which, although I think I'll find that and probably put it up right here. I should have included that in the time-lapse to begin with, but there is a picture of this side, which is cool. But I also have one on the opposite side, which was useful for me, at least, because this area is, like most of Pripyat today, everything is overgrown and very difficult to make out unless you have images or videos of certain locations from back then. And there was very few of this particular location. I mean, it was pretty close. Like, it wasn't like far away from, you know, any sort of like housing or anything like that. It was on the northeastern side of the town, which is where the very tip of the little man-made lake there ended. But yeah, I don't know. It certainly looked like a cool spot from the few pictures and videos that I did find. And yeah, it's like I said already, it's where it seemed where the majority of people went to just kind of relax, you know, whether they had the day off or the families or whatnot. But here's the one image I was mentioning of the backside, so, or back, front, whatever, relative, I should say, the side that's on the side of the, you know, the housing and apartment blocks, not the lakeside. But yeah, there was like that little or I don't even know what to call that, overhang thing. I don't know, but we're at that just little thing there that is a train station. I'm totally blanking on the term for that thing, but for the platform, so you don't, you know, get wet in the rain or whatever. I used it also for when I was building the a couple episodes ago, the Palace of Culture. There was another type of thing like this that was that I built there using the same type of. It's a net. I don't know why I can't think of the name. But either way, you guys know what I'm talking about. This is for the train platform, so, you know, like I said already. But either way, that's once I like got out towards this end, so once I finished up the dock area and that little cafe there, I wasn't really sure what to place on this side, because in real life there was a tiny little building here with a little observation like post, I guess, a tiny little thing that's stuck up. You can go up, I guess, some stairs and you'll be 20-30 feet above the ground, so you can look out, you know, across the pond / lake thing. And, you know, I'm not sure how far your view could have been, but you know, most of it, like if I like looking at Google Maps today and Google Earth, there was a couple street view type images on Google Earth, and, you know, of course, nowadays, as I've already mentioned, and we all know, Pripyat's severely overgrown. So even like areas outside of the city, because across the little area of the lake here, so opposite of, you know, the town, it was actually pretty, just that one, there was a significant area that was not barren, but it wasn't covered in forest and trees like a lot of the area was. So you could see out, I'm guessing, because since there wasn't a ton of trees, you could see out pretty far. And yeah, I didn't really know exactly how to recreate that particular thing. I put just some, I think it was a restaurant, I believe, that I've used a couple other places in the city. I don't know, I might go back and see if I can find something better or make something out of PO, which I was initially even going to make the cafe there out of procedural objects, but I figured that wasn't really worth it. It's a small building, something further outside the main part of the city, and I didn't want to take up too much time on something that wasn't, you know, a super cool building or, you know, anything unique architecturally or anything like that. But anyways, moving on from that, we now are at the cargo port. So this is also in the man-made lake that the, you know, thing we just built was. And this is at more or less the entrance or mouth of the lake. Because, so, I guess I could maybe try and find a map and put up a little picture here, maybe of Google Earth or Google Maps. But, so the main river of Pripyat, which runs down this area, there's this tiny, they like I said, it's a man-made lake, so they created a little area for this to flow in. And at the entrance here, so this actually wasn't used for the construction of the power plant, which is what I assumed before I, you know, did a little research to actually try and find out what it was used for. So I believe all the materials for building at least the first 4 reactors in the main part of the Chernobyl power plant were done so by train. But This was used to bring in materials for expanding the actual town of Pripyat, and also for building the 5th and 6th reactors of the power plant, which never actually were finished. But real quick, what I'm doing here, this is what I do. So like if I'm trying to use procedural objects to, customize, like what I was just doing there, using all the little nodes and then moving them around, trying to, what I did in this case, shrink or lower the cargo, the container crates. So I just didn't think it made sense to have a bunch of container crates with non-Russian symbols and English letters and everything. So I wanted to lower them. Unfortunately, I couldn't lower these 4 there, so I actually do cover them up with a couple. But anyways, as I was saying, it helps for me when I'm trying to do something that's on the ground level or, on the sea level, whatever you want to say in this case, to raise up that particular object, whether it be a big prop, building, or something, whatever it may be. It helps to raise it up. That way you can really get next to it, or even in some cases it helps to get under it, just to change up the view. Because oftentimes when you go into procedural objects and trying to customize a particular object like that, it can be pretty insane. Like right here, this is, you can see all those little vertices from just the wood. And what I was trying to do here is raise this up so it looked like it was being lifted up by the crane here. And there was just way too many there, and I couldn't actually, the object is just so small and there's so many little vertices there. It's pretty much impossible to raise solely that without messing up the other little thing there. So yeah, you can see that the middle stack of wood there in the center on that single prop was a little messed up, but it's small, not too noticeable. But yeah, I do adjust that slightly so the 2 cranes aren't too identical. I would have rotated it more, but anything you might have noticed, but probably not because it's a time lapse and it's a very small amount anyways to begin with. But if I were to rotate it anymore, it just contorted it and looked like it twisted it, so it didn't keep its perfect cylindrical shape. So that was pretty much the max for rotating the crane, but it's enough just so, again, I don't want it to look like 2 identical cranes right next to each other, which, those crane props are actually half decent as far as replicating what actually existed here. The color, I believe, is wrong. I think they were red or brownish red, something like that in real life, but the style, general features, that's pretty accurate. So that's cool, because yeah, when I was building like construction sites for the like cooling towers for the power plant, and I was throwing down cranes and stuff, it just looked a little weird having the more modern construction cranes around, and these at least don't look too modern, so they fit in quite nice. But yeah, so for the, I guess, the land part of this cargo port, I didn't see like any pictures of what actually was here. Looking at Google Maps and Google Earth today, it's pretty open. Like it hasn't been like overgrown a lot. There's certainly some trees and bushes, of course, but for the most part, it's still fairly open, and there's like nothing left behind. So it's certainly possible that this was used, after the Chernobyl disaster, because I do believe I read somewhere that they brought in materials for building the initial sarcophagus. They brought it in through the port this way, so possibly that's why, since it was in use and everything that they were bringing in, they were having to build, in a rush. So they used all the materials to build up the sarcophagus, so maybe that's why there's nothing left here. Again, it's in a project like this, it's hard to really know exactly what existed here when you don't have actual photographs or videos. So going off today's Google Earth, it was just completely empty. So I put very few props here because I just simply didn't really know what to do. Just some wood and some like rusty I-beams. I don't know. It's not a centerpiece of this map. It's a little further out, halfway-ish between the power plant and the the edge of the town of Pripyat. But anyways, moving on from that, we are now going to be working on what is, I guess, at least what I'm going to consider the second of two mostly just public buildings. So there's two blocks in Pripyat which contained almost entirely, if not all, purely just public buildings. So, whether it be 2 episodes ago where we built like the Palace of Culture and some of the like other buildings there's a hotel and a few like schools and such. In this case, this one here isn't too much different. There's a gymnasium. These buildings that I'm placing down here, I believe, are residence halls for some sort of school, maybe perhaps the hospital, which is also in this block, which is what I'm building here. For the hospital, I wasn't like I don't have too many assets that fit a Russian Soviet looking theme that are also small enough and like they look like they're residential apartments. Like it's the same long, narrow, like 7-ish story tall buildings. So it's pretty sizable considering. I believe it had enough rooms for over 400 people. So it was definitely a pretty sizable hospital considering, the town was, less than 50,000 people at its height. But here I'm just using PO to take the roofs from those apartment blocks there, or apartment buildings, and putting them on top of the clinic buildings, which are actual hospital buildings that function in game as hospitals. But I wanted to make them look a little more similar, which is also why I changed the color of those buildings to be a slightly more tannish brown, just to kind of better match the clinic walls a tad bit more. I do go back later and lighten them slightly because they're kind of a bit like a gross mustardy poopy brown color. So I did lighten them up so they didn't look as bad. But yeah, again, like I said, for the hospital, it was kind of weird because I didn't really have the necessary assets to make a hospital. And since the hospital could have easily, like, if, for someone who wasn't truly versed in Soviet architecture or Pripyat, they would probably just assume it's another apartment block or apartment building. So I figured I might as well just use those apartments, and it looks fine, I guess. Doesn't necessarily have to be a hospital. So again, unless you actually know what's existing in every location in Pripyat and you really looked at the city hard, then you're probably not going to know exactly what everything is and just assume it's apartment, and that's fine by me. But anyways, here we are building what was a cemetery. So I'm pretty sure this was the only cemetery in Pripyat, or at least the only sizable one that shows up on the map I'm using. And what I did for this was leave the vast majority of it open. So as you can see there, those are supposed to be little tombstones, and those are the only ones I put. I do go back and I keep that same amount. I just kind of space them into each like little section there, just so it doesn't look as empty. But I keep the same number of tombstones. I figured, the cemetery was probably as old as the city, so considering that, and it was only meant for Pripyat and maybe the small surrounding towns around Pripyat, I figured it would be mostly empty. I could be wrong, but this is another location where there's like pretty much no photos back then. Only a couple videos of people visiting it today, which is pretty useless when I'm trying to build something because it's very overgrown, which I do believe there was a ton of trees in this area, because like when looking at Google Earth, sometimes like you can tell a bit when there's trees that were planted like by the city planners versus trees that sprouted and have been growing since the city was abandoned. There isn't, like, the trees just look different, and also how they're grouped together. If you look closely on Google Earth, you can see some look more random than others. So that does give you a tad bit of an idea of what trees in some areas, because for the most part it's like impossible to tell, but in some places you could tell what trees were actually like really dense, because for the most part there was a ton of open area in the town of Pripyat, but there were some areas certainly where there was some pretty dense foliage. lots of trees and such, but for the most part it was, you know, fairly open. So that's again another thing that's a little difficult using Google Earth, because it's hard to tell, except with a couple instances, as I mentioned, what trees were there back then and what trees have just, you know, reclaimed the town for Mother Nature. But in another sense, I didn't put any trees in the cemetery just because I don't know, I want it to look more like a cemetery and less just like some small little props underneath a big forest. So I wanted the cemetery to stick out a bit more, and I think it turned out all right in the end. But yeah, so a couple of, like I mentioned, that I haven't been liking to keep like all these small details when building the apartment, you know, blocks and stuff like this. I haven't been keeping a lot of the detailing in, and that was just, at least by my, you know, own opinion, which many of you said you know, actually liked this type of detailing, the blocks and all the trees and stuff. But I figured that it was kind of repetitive for, you know, a series in which all these blocks are extremely similar. I'm using very few buildings, so a lot of repetitive buildings, a lot of repetitive trees, just fairly monotonous. So that's why I've, in the past couple of videos, been leaving out most of it, but I've tried to include a few more minutes of the detailing in here. I did cut out still some, but that was more so just simply because the video was going to be pretty long. This one's, you know, 28 minutes just about, so you know, the video was at 30 minutes, so I was trying to I was going back to try and reduce, you know, 10 seconds here and there, because, you know, of course, add all those up and you have a few minutes removed from taken out of the video. But yeah, so the last part of this episode is just me placing the paths here, and then moving on to some small detailing, like with trees, and also I built, you know, more playgrounds. Or no, I actually do believe I cut that out, because I've been building quite a bit of playgrounds in the city, because there were quite a good number of playgrounds in the city for sure. But yeah, there's, again, I mean, if you enjoy this type of stuff, you know, I mean, that's why I'm keeping it in, because like I said, quite a few of you said you enjoy watching this, and since, you know, there's quite a number of people who commented as such, I figured I'd do it for you guys, since, you know, I might as well do it for the people who are vocal and actually really enjoying the series. Since, you know, this is the second to last episode, the next episode is probably, I have to make up my mind, because I honestly could fit, you know, if I really wanted to, 3 more time-lapse build episodes, but I really want to get back into Berlin Noir. It's just, I definitely prefer building in that style versus this type of Soviet city in which it's fairly small. And, like, don't get me wrong, like, Soviet architecture and just that general brutalist style is pretty cool looking. And in some of the larger cities in which you can place down some of the really cool assets on the workshop, then I would be fine making this, you know, a pretty lengthy series. But considering I have to be realistic in the size of the buildings, and I can't really place any cool Soviet monuments and stuff like that, that's why, just to me, building it's quite repetitive. So yeah, I think for the next episode, I will be definitely building some more of the remaining apartment blocks. And then there's also still one piece remaining left to build for the power plant. So directly to the west of the main part of the Chernobyl power plant, there was just in the few pictures that I found, thanks to someone from Instagram, it was just like a mess of supplies. It looked like were just brought in by train and dumped there. There were some small cranes for transporting stuff, I'm guessing, from the trains to the trucks, or from trucks back to the trains, whatever it may be. But it's from the pictures, it just looks like a bunch of junk. I know it's not, but it would probably look quite repetitive placing down a lot of the same props that I have. So, you know, wood and some I-beams and such. So there's not too many options. Some pipes maybe, stuff like that. stuff that I've already done off camera for parts of the power plant that they're actually not part of, or they're not part of the nuclear power plant. They're like chemical processing stations or plants that don't deal with the actual electrical production, but are, I'm not actually sure what their function was back then, aside from just like maybe dealing with chemical waste or whatever else it could possibly be. But anyways, yeah, it's still kind of up in the air with exactly what I want to include, if I want to include anything left in the part of Chernobyl. So let me know if you want to see any other, wrapping up the finishing touches to the Chernobyl power plant, or if you want me to stick solely to just building stuff in Pripyat. So let me know with that, because yeah, I haven't made up my mind at all. But yeah, so we're getting pretty close to the end of this episode. Just finishing off this here, which was a workshop. Just making it look like some workshop supplies, sheds, some junk, some boxes, simple stuff. But yeah, so the series is definitely coming to an end, and I'm definitely ready to finish up the series, but I want to do it well. So I will see you all next week with what I'm planning on certainly being the last build episode of the series. But I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all then.